John O'Malley, S.J., Ph.D., is one of the most important scholars in the field of church history. A university professor in the Department of Theology at Georgetown, Father O'Malley has made unique and outstanding contributions to the intellectual life of the Catholic and global scholarly communities. He deserves the Civitas Dei Medal for many reasons, 3 in particular. First, Father O'Malley, who earned his doctorate at Harvard, has committed more than 60 years of groundbreaking scholarship. For example, his 1993 book, The First Jesuits, marked a new beginning in the tradition of studies on the Society of Jesus. It has been translated into 12 languages. Second, Father O'Malley discovered and gave new light to theological tradition rooted in the church councils held between the 16th and 20th centuries. His 2008 book, What Happened at Vatican II, we're still asking that question, I think, reopened the debate on the Second Vatican Council in an unparalleled way during a difficult time for both academia and the church in the field of conciliar studies. The publication launched a highly successful trilogy for Harvard University Press. Father O'Malley's book on the Council of Trent followed in 2013, and in 2018 his volume on Vatican I. Finally, this Jesuit priest embodies the vocation of a scholar who contributes to academia, the church, and the public square as teacher, thinker, writer, as to crisscross different audiences, fields, times, and places. He moves between the Renaissance and late modernity, America and Rome, theology and history, academic scholarship, and ecclesiastical commitment. His focus is always on helping the church better understand key moments in the church's Catholic tradition. For these and other reasons, Father John O'Malley is a fitting recipient of this award. He personifies the ideal citizen in the Augustinian masterpiece that lends its name to the medal. John, as Barbara mentioned, today is the birth of St. Augustine.
One of my heroes.
Yes, but it's all, we appreciate that. But it's also the feast of the Augustinian world celebrates the feast of all of our saints.
Oh.
And saints are both, in my experience, both living and dead. And we are honored to have a living saint among us.
Who's that?
Well, you don't understand why. It has helped us to understand and better appreciate how God calls each one of us to dwell together in the city of God. So congratulations. Now it's your turn.
My turn. Good. By the way, I got my start in scholarship working on an Augustinian, the prior general of the order, Egidio da Viterbo, Giles Viterbo, who was prior general in the early 16th century, and as a matter of fact was Luther's major superior. So I owe a lot to the Augustinians, and I'm so happy to be here. So my title of my remarks is, Who's in Charge? Past, Present, and Future of Church Governance. I cannot adequately express my gratitude to Villanova University for bestowing on me this wonderful honor. I want to thank Father Donahue, his cabinet, and the others, especially Barbara Wall, who worked to make it possible. The kind words spoken to me about me have touched me deeply, and once again I'm filled with gratitude towards Massimo Fagioli and Bernie Prozac for what they said. I of course want to thank all of you for coming here this afternoon and bearing with me. The Civitas Dei Medal came to me, however, with a price tag. I must sing for my supper. I want you to hear my song. I will talk about the governance of the church, drawing on the chapter of my latest book, When Bishops Meet, an essay comparing Trent, Vatican I and Vatican II, which is happily available for your purchase right here this very afternoon. Aside from its challenging contents, it is of a size that makes it a perfect stocking stuffer for your many friends and relatives during the Christmas season. It's a bargain you cannot afford to pass up. Before I directly address the announced topic for my lecture, I thought that given the occasion, I might speak briefly about what I think I am doing as a historian of the Catholic tradition. It is to studying that tradition, as Father Donahue said, that I've devoted my entire adult life. O'Malley is my game, and my name, history is my game. But what do I think I'm doing when I play that game? Or better, why do I bother playing the game at all? I will be honest. The first reason I play is because I love history. I cannot explain how that passion got into my genes, but into them it got. My mother and her family were all great readers. They loved historical novels, and they loved to talk about them. That context surely had something to do with my passion. In any case, I recall that when I was about 10 years old, I discovered in the little library of the little elementary school in the little town in Ohio where I grew up, a book entitled something like The Kings of France. I loved that book. I devoured it. I read it over and over again. It was about the good old days. Kings and queens, knights and their ladies, pirates and their sword fights, and lots of other great swashbuckling stuff. At about this point, it began to dawn upon my parents that their only child was convinced that he had been born about 400 years too late. The passion for history stayed with me through my Jesuit training, sent me to graduate school for a doctorate in history, and has remained with me ever since. I love what I do, and I continue to be excited by whatever subject that at the moment engages me. I look upon myself as a detective, Massimo, patiently putting the pieces together to arrive at the unique moment of understanding, when the clues point unmistakably to the solution of the conundrum. I doubt, however, that love for history would alone have sustained me through the torture that is euphemistically called graduate school. I doubt that it alone could have sustained me later through the long hours buried in books when I could have been frolicking on the beach, or through the moments, days, and weeks of despair when none of the pieces seemed to be falling together, or when they fell together, seemed to point to nothing more than a colossal waste of time. Every scholar here knows what I mean. No, something more than fascination with the good old days has sustained me. I early came to see what it was, a conviction that I'm engaged in an enterprise of crucial importance for our life today, and of especially crucial importance for our church today. I write about the past, but for the benefit of the present. I will go further. My books, ostensibly about the past, are really about the present. This is tricky business. I cannot let my present concerns intrude upon a quest that must remain as dispassionate as humanly possible. A quest not contaminated by a desire to save received wisdom. A quest that is single-minded, the truth and nothing but the truth. Let the chips fall where they may. Nonetheless, once I experienced the eureka moment of understanding of past phenomenon, I cannot help but ask myself, so what? The so what question has haunted me as long as I can remember. Well then, what do I think I am doing as a historian? For one thing, I am engaging in a project of liberation. By studying the past, I've tried to liberate myself and others from the ironclad grasp it has on our unknowing selves. We are products of the past. The situations in which we find ourselves, our culture, and our church are the result of decisions taken years, decades, and centuries ago. Good history enables us to say, that is how I got to be the way I am. We experience a measure of liberation, as when on the analyst's couch, we see how a mother's scolding still has us in its grip. As William Faulkner said in Requiem for a Nun, the past is never dead. It is not even past. Study of the past reveals a contingency of past decisions that affect us now. We thus see that there was a time when things were different from what they are now. Since it was not always thus, maybe it need not be thus now. We acquired new freedom in decision-making. Many decades ago, I wrote an article entitled, How to Get Rid of History. My clever and self-serving answer was that the way to get rid of it was to study it. Liberation is but one side of what I hope to be doing. There are others. Sometimes I just want to set the record straight. My book on the Council of Trent is a case in point. People praise and damn the council for things it never did. I wanted my book to change that situation by showing what it actually did and what it actually did not do. But there's much more. As a historian of Catholic culture and tradition, I'm blessed to spend my days engaged with the incomparable variety, richness, and sheer genius of that culture and tradition when it is viewed in its full scope. I find the experience stimulating, sometimes even exhilarating. Do not misunderstand me. I am not Pollyanna about our tradition. Sin has marked it at every step. It is a church of great scandals, beginning at the first moment with Jesus' betrayal by his chosen ones. We cannot, however, wallow in the sin and scandal, as today we sometimes seem to be tempted to do. By applying the hermeneutic of suspicion regarding our past, we must also apply the hermeneutic of compassion. If we do so, we will find resources to help us in our present difficulties, resources to spark our imagination, and resources to inspire us to take positive steps toward the future. We can go deeper. Our Catholic tradition is more than the sum total of normative ecclesiastical documents. It is more than a collection of holy concepts and defined dogmas. It is more than an intellectual tradition. It is bigger than that. It includes the lived experience of the faithful as expressed in their actions through the centuries. If we want to understand that tradition, we want to understand what it means to be a Catholic, it is there we must turn. This is really a big senior moment. St. Francis of Assisi, Dante, Teresa of Avila, Michelangelo, Caravaggio, Gerard Manley Hopkins, Flannery O'Connor, Dorothy Day, Mother Teresa, and the martyrs of El Salvador are as important for understanding the Catholic tradition as are the decrees of the Council of Trent, says a historian of the Council of Trent. In any case, illuminating the breadth and depth of the Catholic tradition is what I like to think I am doing. If I am correct, then I am engaged in serious business. People sometimes tell me they enjoy my books. That pleases me. I hope, however, that the books do more than provide pleasure. I want them to shake people up a little bit, I want them to startle readers into asking serious questions about themselves, about their presuppositions, and about their church. Serious questions about how they and their church got to be the way they are. Today, for instance, every Catholic knows that the Pope runs the church. After all, Jesus gave the keys to Peter, which means that the Pope is in charge. If that is the case, why is it that I entitled the third chapter of my new book, the one on sale now, Who is in Charge? I can tell you why. It is because the answer to that question is rich and complex, and because a review of its history tells us not only how we came to believe that the Pope runs the church, but also holds implications for where the church under Pope Francis seems to be heading today. To understand our church governance, we must, of course, begin at the beginning. No later than the early 2nd century, bishops had emerged as overseers of their respective communities and as overseers of other ministers who served those communities, presbyters, deacons, and eventually priests. Thus, a hierarchical structure fell into place. The bishops in collegial fashion called together their ministers and others in meetings to deal with issues that had arisen in their domain. They sometimes joined in colleagueship with other bishops of the vicinity or province in such meetings to deal with issues of wider import. Thus, a collegial structure came into being to complement the hierarchical. They sometimes called these meetings synods, a Greek word, and other times councils, a Latin word. Synod and councils were thus synonyms. The Council of Trent, for instance, refers to itself as this Holy Synod, and Vatican II did the same. What does this mean? What were these meetings? These synods or councils were meetings, principally of bishops, gathered in Christ's name, to make decisions binding on the church. That definition holds for both the 20 or so Catholics recognized as ecumenical or church-wide, and the hundreds upon hundreds of local councils, such as the councils of Baltimore in the United States in the 19th century. In any case, we see that these synods councils are next to the episcopacy itself, the oldest institution in the Christian church. No later than the 3rd century, bishops began paying special heed to the actions and opinions of the Bishop of Rome, and in time that heed became more pronounced, especially in the West. Rome has spoken, the matter is settled, said St. Augustine in a sermon in the 5th century. Thus, another level was added to the hierarchical structure. Nonetheless, the churches continue to be self-governing institutions under the local bishop. In the 2nd century alone, at least 50 councils took place in Palestine, North Africa, Rome, Spain, Gaul, and elsewhere. Thus, a pattern was established of local councils, synods, that with many vicissitudes persisted strong in the West until the late 19th century. In 325, the bishops met at Nicaea in the first church-wide council in history. It was convoked not by the Bishop of Rome or by the Patriarch of Constantinople, but by the Roman Emperor Constantine. The emperor not only convoked the council, but held it in his palace, occasionally presided at its sessions, and in effect gave the council its agenda. He allowed the bishops freedom to deal with the agenda as they saw fit, but he promised to enforce their decisions as the law of the empire. Constantine thus assumed responsibility for the well-being of the church, adding a further dimension to the hierarchical structure of church governance. Emperors, or in one instance an empress, convoked the next 7 church-wide councils recognized by Catholics, a powerful symptom of the authority secular authorities enjoyed in church governance into the late 19th century. Although we may rejoice over separation of church and state in these more recent times, we need to recognize that that separation has not been an unmixed good. The secular authorities were a lay voice in the operation of the church. They indeed often abused their authority, but perhaps no more often than ecclesiastical authorities abused theirs. They were able to hold ecclesiastical authorities accountable. They were sometimes more sensitive to the needs of the church than were the churchmen. Moreover, at certain points they intervened to rescue the church and the papacy from impending disaster. Emperor Henry III, for instance, almost single-handedly reformed the papacy in the 11th century, ending the long period sometimes called, with just a touch of exaggeration, the papal pornocracy. In any case, from the time of the Council of Nicaea, three players had at least in embryo emerged in the governance of the church: the popes, the secular authorities, and the bishops with their local and their church-wide synods. These three players sometimes acted as partners, sometimes as rivals, but each of them always acted with keen awareness of the right to a voice in decision-making and of their right to a role in church governance. Trent was the last council in which this trinity was truly operative. The cry for a council to resolve the issues Luther raised broke out almost immediately after his excommunication. The outburst reveals that many, perhaps most Catholics, did not think the papal bull excommunicating him was the final word. Holy Roman Emperor Charles V took up the cry for a council, and became the most consistent and insistent advocate for it for the next 25 years. Pope Clement VII, fearful that the council might depose him, slithered out of every corner into which the emperor forced him. But the next Pope, Paul III, agreed to convoke a council at the city of Trent, hundreds of miles distant from Rome. Had it not been for the emperor's constant pressure, the council might never have taken place. Not only that, Pope Paul III wanted to restrict the council's agenda to answering the doctrinal issues raised by Luther and the other reformers. The emperor insisted it deal with the reform of the church, which meant the reform of the pastorate, the episcopacy, and even the papacy. The Pope wanted to restrict reform to himself, but finally had to allow the council to take it up. From almost its first moment, the relationship to the papacy of the bishops of Trent, who were exceedingly jealous of their authority gathered in church and council, began to take ominous turns. The bishops resented any suggestion that the Pope controlled the agenda, and by the third period of the council, they had become convinced that the Pope was obstructing their efforts to reform the church. This conflict brought the council to a standstill that lasted for 10 months, during which the council was paralyzed, unable to pass a single decree. The situation was desperate, and it looked as if the council might simply disintegrate. Finally, in March 1563, Emperor Ferdinand, Charles' successor, intervened. He wrote 2 letters to Pope Pius IV, in which he in veiled but unmistakable terms threatened to take matters into his own hands unless the Pope moved to resolve the crisis. When it became clear to the Pope that King Philip II of Spain and Queen Catherine de' Medici of France might well follow the Emperor's lead, the Pope finally moved. With that, the Council was finally able to conclude its business. Envoys or ambassadors of the secular authorities played an active role in the Council of Trent. In 1562, for instance, Sigismund Baumgartner, a layman, envoy of the Duke of Bavaria, addressed the council and pleaded for the council to allow married men of proven integrity to be ordained priests, at least in German-speaking lands. As the council neared its close, it reminded secular authorities of their duty to see to it that the council's enactments be observed in their realms. It did not, however, forget the ancient citadel tradition of the Church, and it mandated that bishops hold a synod annually in their dioceses. For our topic, Vatican I, the next church-wide council, 1869-1870, 150th anniversary, will be celebrated December the 8th this year, is important especially for three reasons. First, it was the first council in which the laity had no voice. The organizers of the council did not, in principle, want to exclude that voice, but after the French Revolution, the political situation in Europe was so volatile and confusing that they did not know how to proceed. The laity lost their influence at the council more by default than by deliberate decision. Second, as you know well, the council defined papal imprimacy and papal infallibility, which resulted from the need Catholics felt for certainty and stability in a situation in which all received wisdom seemed to be up for grabs. Liberty, equality, and fraternity, which had promised to be a panacea for society's ills, had proved to be for Catholics nothing other than a recipe for chaos and carnage. A pope with sweeping authority in church management and with seemingly unlimited authority in teaching promised to right the wrong and chase away the modern world. Thus, with the council, Catholics learned that the Pope runs the church. Third, as collateral damage of the decree on primacy and infallibility, the traditional collegial and synodal tradition of the church got sidelined almost to the point of extinction. After 1878, for instance, there were no more councils of Baltimore. Ecclesiastical pundits were convinced, moreover, that Vatican I was the ecumenical council that ended ecumenical councils. The Pope now could and should decide everything. There would be no Vatican II. Surprise! There was a Vatican II. Not only that, but the council's most important and therefore most contested enactment was its reaffirmation of the synodal or collegial or conciliar tradition of church governance with and under the successor of St. Peter. Yet this enactment of Vatican II reaffirmed a central but almost forgotten aspect of the Catholic tradition, and in so doing, the Council hoped to restore a balance in how church governance would henceforth operate. After the Council, however, it sometimes seemed as if the Council's affirmation of collegiality was an exercise in futility. The Synod of Bishops, for instance, sometimes seemed to be rubber stamps for decisions reached before the bishops met. Pope St. Paul VI, moreover, had redefined the word synod in 1965 when he constituted the Synod of Bishops. He stipulated that the Synod of Bishops was a consulting body to the Holy See, whereas the word synod had up to that time meant a decision-making body. Synods, we recall, were meetings principally of bishops gathered in Christ's name to make decisions binding on the church. Fast forward to 2013, the election of Pope Francis. Under him, the Synod of Bishops has, in theory, retained its purely consultative function, but he has given to bishops a new freedom of expression, has introduced the laity into the meetings, and has arguably given the final report of the synods more authority. He has, moreover, increased the number of synods and broadened the range of the questions the synods address. For the last 18 months, the synodal issue seems to have leapt to an entirely new level of urgency. On March the 18th, 2018, the International Theological Commission issued an extraordinary report in which it promoted synodality as the mode of church being for the times in which we live. The report spoke repeatedly and characteristically of the church as the synodal church. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith formally approved the document, and the Pope gave it his blessing. The final report of the Amazon Synod, which ended just 2 weeks ago, dedicates its fifth and final chapter to the topic. The word synod, it says, quotation, indicates the way that God's people walk together, which is a clear sign that together, close quotation, which is a clear sign that the report does not envisage synods as an exclusively clerical affair. As the final and culminating chapter of the report, synods emerge with remarkable emphasis and as the instrument for the implementation of the measures the Amazon Synod articulated. Synodality, the report states, quotation, characterizes the Church of Vatican II, understood as the people of God, equally sharing different ministries, charisms, and services. It indicates a specific way of living and acting in communion on the same journey, gathered in assembly and in the active participation of all members in proclaiming the gospel. For us to walk together, the Church today needs a conversion to the synodal experience. Close quotation. The Church today needs a conversion to the synodal experience. Those are strong words. And taken literally, they hold big implications for how church governance is supposed now to function. Where all this will lead, who knows? If synodality should take hold on the local level, which is certainly what the two documents indicate, it would give the laity a voice in helping the church address crises, such as the sex abuse crisis, as they arise. It might even lead to a modification of the process for the selection of local bishops. In any case, we see that synods, that is councils, are not an issue of the dead past, but are staring us in the face at this very moment. Faulkner got it right. The past is never dead. It's not even past. Thank you.